Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and this is the HiFi for All, or HFA Dahlia. This is currently a $999 US open back, full-size, dynamic driver headphone. This unit right here was given to me at CanJam SoCal 2025 by Nick over at HFA. He literally had the package together that I'll show you all of the accessories and handed it to me and just said, stick this in your suitcase on the flight home and give it a review. And so that's what I'm going to do. I don't know for sure that I get to keep it, probably, given the fact that there was no shipping carton, in there. But you have my pledge to be as honest and as open about this review as I possibly can be. The link that you see down in the description where you can buy the Dahlia is just there for your convenience. No affiliate link this time. However, if you want to help support the channel, and I hope you do, please consider becoming a subscriber if you're not, checking out my PayPal, my Patreon, or becoming a channel member. All right, the Dahlia. Really, has a very DIY kind of look to it, but what's really interesting about it is it has what's called Resonator rings in it. What those are, what they do for the sound, and all of that we will talk about as the review unfolds, but that's really the unique thing, I think, about this headphone that's pretty cool and is rather effective, actually. So, stick around right after shameless self-promotion to learn all about that.
Hi, it's me again. 14 months later and a whole foot taller. Now, since Wave Theory liked the first 10,000 subscriber play button I made him, maybe he wants a 25,000 subscriber play button. This can only happen if you subscribe, though. Now, since over 60% of the watch time comes from unsubscribed viewers, I'm gonna need you to subscribe. You can also sign up for his Patreon or send him money in PayPal. Links in the description. Now, on to the video.
All right, as usual, there's a lot to talk about, so we could be here for a while. Use the timestamps to jump around and watch the points of most interest and relevance to you. Let me clean up the story about how these came to be in my possession here just a little bit. I first met Nick of HFA there at CanJam, New York. Listened to this headphone with both Resonator ring types. I'll explain what those are in just a moment. Okay, and thought it was pretty interesting. Wanted to get it in for review, so we got connected. We got each other's information and so forth. And then just general life busyness happened for me, and of course he's also running a business and needs to focus on that. He should not be focusing on getting a review unit to a certain bespectacled and overly verbose reviewer. So but he did have a unit for me by the time we got to CanJam SoCal. He said, you know, when I saw him there, it's like, oh, I was hoping you would be here, I have one for you. And so he had a package of the headphone, the Resonator rings of both types, and the sound satchel, which you'll see a little bit here, all ready to go for me. And yeah, just said, here, take this with you, put it in your suitcase. And again, I'm kind of assuming I'm probably going to get to keep it just because there is no return packaging or anything like that. Like literally, I had the sound satchel, which you'll see in a minute, with the headphone and the accessories inside it that I stuck in my suitcase on the way home from CanJam SoCal. It has taken me a while to get to this review, so sorry about that, Nick. For a couple of reasons. One, the pads were brand new and did need to wear in. This is something that Nick talks about in a series of YouTube videos that he has out, and I will link to some of them down in the description there, where he talks about some of the design decisions made and like just getting this thing up and running and started and all of that. And one of them is that some pad wear in is required. You can get some excess sibilance and sharpness in the treble with the brand new and relatively stiff pads. Part of the reason why this took, nearly 3 months really to turn around was because like I needed to get those pads worn in on my own head so that they would fit there. That takes time, and of course I'm also turning out lots of reviews and have lots of products in here to evaluate on the regular, so that just took some time to get through all of that before I could really even sit down and give a proper listen. So yes, some break-in is required on this headphone. Not necessarily the drivers this time. I don't think that was the issue. Just the pads need to wear in, some of the flexibility of the headband, and just like the stiffness slash looseness of the different mechanisms on the headphone and all that. They just loosen up and wear in over time and with use. So that's something that you should expect here if you were to buy one of these brand new. It's going to sound a little bit overly sharp when you first put it on, and that treble sharpness will fade and become more and and the tonality up top will smooth out a bit over time, particularly as the pads wear in. Okay. So then, like the HFA Dahlia, again, what it is, open back, full-size, dynamic driver headphone. The dynamic drivers in there are 50 millimeters in diameter. They are rated at 32 ohms of impedance with a 98 decibel sensitivity, at least according to HFA's website. It does say 98 decibel, A-weighted with a 1 watt, 1 meter input, which that's how we measure speakers. So I doubt very much that they put a watt of power through this headphone and a microphone 1 meter away to measure that. So I don't know what's going on there, but it is reasonably easy to drive. It's not a difficult load or anything like that. It was powered just fine off of DAPs. Like I used my FIO M21 DAP to power this a fair amount and everything was fine there. So it is not particularly power hungry or difficult to drive there. All right. So with that stuff out of the way, I do want to switch up the vantage point here, show you an overhead view of this, where we take a closer look at the build, how it's put together, and talk about these, the Resonator rings, which I keep talking about. I'll show you these up close, what they do, what they're for. I won't go into the details of how they work and all that, but they are essential to not only how the headphone gets put together and stays together, but they also affect the sound here. And so we've got some things to talk about with this. So let's go ahead and look at that clip. We'll come back on the other side of that and talk sound. All right, the Dahlia is a very interestingly built headphone. It looks like most of the cup and the gimbal, or like, you know, the yoke here and all of that kind of stuff looks like basically the whole thing looks like it's 3D printed, other than these rods right here and the spring steel on the headband, and then this understated Buffalo Montreal leather. Montreal Buffalo leather. I think I got that backwards. Okay, right here on the headband right there. But the rest of it seems like it's very modular, 3D printed, and so forth on that. Okay. The interesting thing, to me, the most interesting thing about the Dahlia is this. It's these Resonator rings right here. And what these are, they are 3D printed. I mean, you can tell they have holes in them right here, and they are meant to bring in sound waves and resonate to help control the frequency response of the headphone, which is a very interesting approach here. I've not really seen a whole lot of others do this, okay, but you can get 2 ring types for the Dahlia here. Maybe Nick will roll out more in the future. I have no idea. I didn't ask, but it would make sense that it's doable. All right. In the stock package, if you get the $999 package right there, these rings right here with the blue stickers on them are the stock rings. They are the balanced Resonator rings. $30 more will get you the dynamic Resonator rings, which have red stickers on them. They are currently what's installed on the headphone because that's what I was listening to more recently as I was in the review process here. And now I'm going to switch them back, and I'm going to use that opportunity to film this so we can see how the headphone is built and so forth. And also, this is one of the easiest, like Nick put a lot of thought and some clever engineering into how this works, because this is actually pretty straightforward. All right. ZMF lambskin suede hybrids right here are the pads used. Using ZMF pads was a smart move because ZMF makes excellent pads. All right, but look, this is all there is to it. Just kind of get your fingers in here, all right, and then pull, and they send a tool to make this easier, but that just pulls right off, okay? And then here you go. Here is one of the balanced Resonator rings, and swapping these out is actually pretty easy, okay? So the way these are different is, like, I think the hole diameters, okay? If we look here, it's possible the hole diameters are just a little bit different. The internal workings of these Resonator rings, okay, look just a little bit different so that they resonate in just a little bit different way. But you see here that like basically everything here is 3D printed except for the driver in there is a 50mm dynamic driver in there. Hopefully this one comes off just a little bit more easily than the last one. It's always harder on camera than when you're just doing it yourself. That one was not too bad. All right. Okay, so then just take these out. Slip that out here, and these are actually really easy to put back in. Okay, just like one of the easiest pad rolls you can do, honestly. Whoops, sorry about bumping the camera there. I say it's easy, and of course doing it on camera makes it look, always makes it more challenging than it actually is, but trust me when I say this is one of the easier pad rolls I have done. Of this style, anyway, where you actually have to move the flap up around the thing here. Okay, those are always the harder ones to do, even though they're super common. But, you know, having it outside of the headphone here makes it a lot easier. There it is. Easier to do. There it is. Okay, once this is done, okay, the thin part of the resonator ring, you just push back down in place here, and this is a nice, nifty little feature. There is a notch on the bottom of the cup right there, and that notch lines up with the seam of the pad, and all you need to do, okay, is push those back together again, and actually I got this one on the wrong side. This is the right pad here. But same on either side, right? Okay, all you do is line those up, line the seam up with that notch. All right, and then push it into place. Okay, done. Now I'm going to pause it and do that on the other side. You don't need to watch me do the whole process again. All right, so honestly, a pretty slick system here. For the cost of another set of pads, you can go ahead and pre-install them on the rings, the other rings there, and hot swap as you wish. They are ZMF pads, so you can get other ZMF pad types from ZMF's website, put them on there, and experiment to your heart's content as well on the sound there, although these were designed and engineered with these pads here in mind. All right, otherwise you get dual 3.5mm cable entry there on the cup. You see that there is basically limitless swivel this way. You get enough rotation this way for comfort and all of that. This is like, I think, just over 400 grams of mass, so it's not light, but it's not heavy. But this headband is also very well constructed. It is comfortable. It has a good balance in clamp force in terms of holding it on your head without it moving around as you turn your head and that sort of thing. Even though it just looks kind of DIY, it actually is very well engineered, very well made, and quite durable in there. Okay, whether or not the aesthetic works for you is in the eye of the beholder, but like you can tell, a lot of thought and care and attention to detail went into this design, and it works quite effectively here in my experience with it. Okay, another accessory that comes stock is this here pouch, which HFA calls the sound satchel. Let me get these out of the way and this out of the way, and I think we're going to need to back the camera up just a wee bit. There we go. Now it all fits in the frame. Professional videographer over here for sure, right? Okay, so you get the HiFi for all there on the written on it, and they say it's an all-weather bag, and it's got some pockets and all of that in it to carry your stuff. What comes with it here in this front pocket is you get an authentication tag right there for the headphone that you get. You also get this bag of tools in here for adjustments and everything. You get this little pry bar, that's this long black thing here right here, because you notice like I was able to pull the pads off of the headphone cup there. If you're struggling with that, you can use this end of this little tool they send in there to wedge in there and kind of loosen it up so that you can get it out of there, okay, and that sort of thing. And then you've got like Allen keys in there, an Allen screwdriver, a little Allen wrench key thing in there to tighten things back down if you ever need to, okay, that sort of thing. Again, highly modular. I think that's all in that front pocket right there. Okay, then you can stick the headphone itself in here, and there's some nice thoughtful little things here. Like this is not included. This is a FIO M21 DAP. Hello. Okay, but it's I put it in there to show you that you can carry your mobile playback device in this pouch just as well as you can anything else. All right, and then here's an example of the stock cable right here. So this adapter, if you go from XLR to single-ended here, is about $30 on their website. Here is the stock cable. For free, you can get the OFC cable that is either 4-pin XLR or 6.35 millimeter single-ended in there. And yeah, it's just a nice light OFC cable, dual 3.5 millimeter TS plugs on the headphone, and there are cable upgrade options on the website for about 120 bucks. I think you can get OCC cabling in there as well, but I mean, you see it's a fairly nice cable, lies nicely, doesn't really tangle on itself, not a lot of memory. Okay, good stuff. Pretty good quality stuff here. So there you go. That's the package. That's the build. I mentioned a few things about comfort. Let's get to me back on camera talking about other things. All right, let's start transitioning towards sound, and what I have done traditionally is list out all of my test gear here, but that, I mean, I'm already long-winded enough as it is. I'm trying to write the signal chains that I use down in the description below, and if I have reviewed a piece that is named in a signal chain, I will put a link to that review right next to it. So see down in the description below for the gear that I used to test this with, and so forth. So let's go ahead and dive into the sound here. And we do have two sound profiles to talk about, because the stock Resonator rings, the rings that come with the headphone at that flat $9.99 price right there, are the balanced rings. The dynamic rings cost an extra $30 here, and the sound is noticeably different between the two, so we're going to need to talk about both here real quick. So the changes are really more tonal between the two resonator ring types than they are anything else. The dynamic rings, I believe, are called the dynamic rings because their tone kind of helps like flesh out some of the physicality and the dynamics, just because they put a little bit more tonal weight behind things like kick drums and so forth in there, rather than actually adding to the dynamics. So with the balanced rings here, which again are the stock, I found the overall signature of this from a frequency response standpoint to lean kind of like mostly neutral, leaning slightly bright. Okay, so there is that sharpness that I mentioned earlier that does decrease and smooth out rather significantly with pad wear in, but even when that process is done, there is a brightness to the presentation here with the balanced rings. There is just a hint of sibilance with it. Okay, it's not bad. It's usually not fatiguing most of the time with some music genres, but their treble-sensitive listeners here, I think, are going to have some objections in particular, just because there is a bit of brightness and to the point of some sharpness and sibilance here with the balanced rings here on this headphone. Again, it's not terrible, but it's going to bother some people. For me, it was a little bit too much, sometimes with really aggressive and often poorly recorded music, like hard rock, heavy metal, those kinds of things, where like rapid fire cymbal hits that were not recorded well and so forth could get a little bit piercing and fatiguing rather quickly here. All right, so that's like the biggest objection that I have. I'm not against neutral bright tunings overall, but there is just a little bit of wandering wandering into sibilant territory a little bit too often for my liking here. Now, the mid-range I think is pretty well tonally balanced. I really did not have any significant issues with shoutiness or honkiness or hollowness in the timbre, which I very often am sensitive to. I really was not picking out that at all here with the balanced strings. It has a pretty good natural vocal timbre. Pianos, stringed instruments, acoustic guitars, etc. They all sound like pretty reasonably good approximations of the real thing there through the mid-range. The bass is also pretty good. There is just a little bit, I think, just a hint of above Harman Target kind of mid-bass, maybe between like 100-ish and 120 hertz, 150 hertz, maybe somewhere around in there. Just a little bit, which gives it just a hint of bloom, but it is not... it's tastefully done. It does not bleed into the lower mid-range, so I wasn't getting like excess boom or bloat, okay, or anything like that from male vocals and all of that. That is well done, but it adds like an element, just a little bit of fun in like the mid-bass region. There is a bit of roll-off in the sub-bass down below about 50 hertz. Nothing that is out of line though for an open back headphone. That's rather common, okay? It's just like that's what often happens there, and it happens here too. All right. The presentational aspects, though, are getting pretty interesting, and like there is one aspect that just really stands out as a positive here, or a fun positive anyway, and that is the impact of the sound. Even with the balanced rings here, like that mid-bass that I was just talking about has some definite slam to it, right? Some physicality. There's a lot of impact with kick drum hits, with bass guitar string plucks, and that sort of thing, and that's true. And the reason I mentioned that before we get to the tonality of the dynamic rings is because this headphone always excels at the dynamics, right? It's got a very active, lively, energetic sound to it. Lots of impact, particularly in the low end. I am struggling to name, it's on the level of like focals, okay, in terms of that impactfulness of the sound. That's really quite a standout trait here. So if you like the way focals slap your head around, you'll like what this does. If you don't like the way focals slap your head around, then you won't like what this does, okay? But that's the level of kind of stuff that we're talking about here. All right, now the tonality of the dynamic rings here. What the dynamic rings do is they definitely lift the bass region just a little bit. It's not a lot, just a couple of dB, okay? There are a couple of treble lifts as well in a couple of spots. Like... it doesn't seem that the treble lift or the differences in the treble presentation between the balanced rings and the dynamic rings here is like, it's not a shelf up or down thing. There's a couple of spots where the dynamic rings make a certain peak at certain frequencies come forward, and then the balanced rings do it for other frequencies. But I do think overall more people will likely find the dynamic rings to be overall a little bit more in the treble energy there, so just a little bit brighter overall. However, because there is also that lift in the bass by a couple of dB, which is more shelf-like down low there, I found that the overall tone with the dynamic ring struck me as being more close to true neutral. Okay, so with the balanced rings, I thought neutral leaning bright. With the dynamic rings, just neutral. Right? Which I didn't quite expect, but that's how my ears perceived it and how it came across. So what was interesting to me, though, like they're still pretty strong across the board, both of them. Like the mid-range tonality doesn't change much at all between the two ring types here. You just get a little bit more bass and then a slightly different treble presentation with the dynamic rings here. That again, to me, overall the tonality came across a little bit more neutral. And then I mentioned this already, that dynamics, that standout nature that I was talking about the impactfulness of the sound through the bass region, like is emphasized a little bit with the dynamic rings, and that's probably why they're called the dynamic rings, but not really from an actual impact standpoint. It's because I think, to my ears here, that little bit of extra, that couple dB extra of bass boost that these give you, again, gives it a little bit more weight and body in the low end, which means that there's just a little bit more oomph behind the impact of the bass drums and the electric guitar string plucks and that sort of thing. So when a kick drum hits with the dynamic rings, you get that nice, like the initial impact, that leading edge, the physicality of it initially is pretty much even between the two. There's just a little bit more arguably satisfying whoomp behind it with the dynamic rings than there is from the balanced rings there. So that to me were the primary tonal differences in the sound between the two ring types. There was another presentational aspect to the dynamic rings that I was less a fan of, and that is just the way the treble presentation changed. It changed just enough that it added a little bit excess glare to me in the lower treble anyway. Like, you could argue it was upper mid-range, but it still sounded a little bit more trebly than mid-rangey to me, okay, to my ears in there anyway. And that gave it just a little bit too much bite, a little bit too much glare, and it got a little bit fatiguing too quickly for things like hard rock, heavy metal, those kinds of things again. So I mentioned that fatigue with those same music genres happens with the balanced rings. Okay, it just happens more frequently and more quickly to my ears with the dynamic rings here. So this also tells me then that the Dahlia, at least to my ears and for my hearing, is a little bit more of a music genre specialist than it is a generalist. It seems to struggle, and a lot of that glare comes in, and again, enhanced glare with the dynamic rings here, with distorted electric guitars. So yeah, rock, metal, those sorts of things, like that can struggle a little bit. Lots of brass instruments kind of do the same thing to me on here as well. And then if you get like really aggressively played rapid fire hit cymbals, which again shows up in a lot of rock and metal subgenres, right? Okay, that can also get a little bit fatiguing. Again, more so on the dynamic rings, but it happens on both ring types. Where this headphone really excelled and I thought sounded really good with music genres was on more acoustic stuff that's not brass heavy. Strings, piano, okay, a lot of jazz sounds pretty good through here as well. Okay, but EDM. Okay, electronic music, dance music, house music, trap, trip hop, those kinds of things where it's like a highly synthetic sound really good on this. And so if you like combine the impactfulness of the low end here with those presentational aspects that I've been talking about, and avoid that mid-range glare a lot, or lower treble glare, which these genres tend to do, then this headphone was really a lot of fun, very engaging, and I liked listening to it very much for those kinds of music genres there. Okay. But regardless of ring type, let's talk about some other presentational aspects to the sound that the rings have in common. Fairly large soundstage, good width to it, some decent depth, a little bit more height than I think some people are going to realize. So it's nicely three-dimensional in there. Good imaging and separation and all of that going on in the sound field as well. So, I mean, like, no real complaints there. Also, pretty good resolution and texturing, and that really comes out when you scale up with source gear, because while I haven't talked about the signal chains, again, they're down in the description, one chain that I did use was my combination of my Berkeley Alpha Series 2 DAC and my LTA Z10E headphone amplifier, or amplifier headphone output. Very high-end signal chain there. Plug this into that, and just, wow, like the level of resolution and texturing and the three-dimensionality of the soundstage and all of that was like really nice coming out of there. So there is some scaling up with source chain gear quality here as well, which tells me that it's got a pretty resolving driver in it. So whatever driver Nick chose to use in here was a good choice. All right. Now, with that out of the way, we'll get to some comparisons here, because this, just under $1,000 price point here is crowded. Okay, there's a lot of headphones going on, or a lot of stuff going on there. Two similar type headphones that I have in to compare this with would be the $750 Mirph Designs Mirph-1 in here. And then I also have, and I recently reviewed, the HEDD D1, which is $800. Okay, also a dynamic driver, open back, and so forth. All right. The Mirph-1 is a little bit more neutrally tuned than the Dahlia with the balanced rings. They are similarly neutral, I think, with the dynamic rings in the Dahlia there. The Mirph-1, though, has the better bass extension. It does not roll off in the deep end. Its real party trick is that it has like that linear extension all the way down to 20 hertz in there, which is pretty impressive. It also has just a hint of warmth to its overall sound signature as well, so it's like arguably a neutral, just leaning warm, okay, kind of presentation in it. The Mirph also has a nice wide sound stage to it and all of that. So I would say the Dahlia, to my ear, is just ever so slightly more resolving and slightly more textured overall in its sound than the Mirph-1 is. Okay, and I'm going to hold a comment for another one, because the D1, I noticed this difference here too. So we're going to come back to something here in a moment. Okay. Again, just ever so slightly more resolving and textured than the Mirph-1 was. And the Dahlia is also more impactful in that dynamic. So if you like a slammy headphone, you want your kick drums to rattle your skull a bit more, the Dahlia has that advantage over the Mirph-1. Okay. The HEDD D1 here is more warmly tuned than either the Mirph-1 or either iteration of the Dahlia for sure here. And it's also got, like, it's part because it's got a little bit more of that bass presence, but also I think the upper treble is rolled off just a little bit in comparison with these other two here. The soundstage from the D1 is not as large as either the Dahlia or the Mirph-1 in there and so forth. But its resolution and detail retrieval is every bit as good as the Dahlia's, and its ability to scale up is also in there. But the Dahlia still has that impactfulness advantage in there. It is just the hardest hitting of these headphones by a considerable margin. So again, if that's a trait you like, the Dahlia has it in spades. If it's a trait you don't like, the Dahlia still has it in spades. Okay, so there are those things. Now, the thing that I mentioned here just a moment ago that I noticed when I compared the Dahlia with either ring type to either of these. So first of all, either of these headphones, the Mirph-1 and the D1, I think are a little bit more music genre generalist than the Dahlia is. I could listen to them for rock and heavy metal, etc. Also EDM, hip-hop, those kinds of music in there as well. Classical, brass instruments, whatever I wanted to, these two can handle a little bit more. The Dahlia, again, has that little bit of specificity to it, I think, at least to my ears. Okay? The nature of the spatial presentation is what I want to talk about a little bit here. So even though the Dahlia is a very large stager and the Mirph has a fairly large stage as well, the D1 not so much, but it's it's not intimate, it's just not as large a stager as these two are. Okay. The coherence of the sound stage, the imaging and the separation are a little bit different here. The D1 and the Mirph-1 being closer to each other than what the Dahlia does. The Dahlia's little bit of added brightness to it, I think, kind of gives like the imaging and the separation a little bit more of a pinpoint nature to it. So when I place instruments in the sound field, or when it places instruments in the sound field, it's like, it's really that violinist is right here, okay, right on my fingertip, okay, kind of a thing. Whereas with the D1 or the Mirph-1, they're kind of like in this little area right here. All right, and then they both, like all three headphones, do a very good job at their price point of putting space between neighboring sounds in there and doing the separation aspects. It's just that, and again, I think this is because of the emphasized brightness with the Dahlia. All of the individual sounds come to a little bit more fine of a point, okay, in the sound field there. Whereas with the D1 and the Mirph-1, again, just the sounds, it's a little bit more blended across the sound field. Which one is right is going to be in the ears of the beholder. They're all very good. So I'm not criticizing any of them with this statement here, just trying to talk about a little bit different in nature of the presentation that I picked out here. So I'm going to leave it to you to decide which is correct. To my ears, I think the D1 and the Mirph-1 are a little bit more natural in their coherence, okay, particularly laterally, because there's still a nice clear, here is the space in where this instrument or this vocalist belongs, and then here are spaces where they don't. But it flows a little bit more naturally to my ear, whereas that fine point nature of the Dahlia, I think, is almost a little bit like edge enhancement. It's not quite realistic or natural, but it is very impressive in the way that it pinpoints things. And so that, to me, is another reason why the Dahlia kind of really seems to excel with synthetic music. Okay, EDM, hip hop, trip hop, house music, you know, those kinds of things in there, that I really enjoyed those genres a lot with the Dahlia. I mean, a lot. Whereas like for rock, metal, symphonies, like a lot of classical like symphonies, just because of that nature of the spatial presentation, I kind of leaned towards these two on those genres, even though they also sound very good with EDM as well. So it's just going to come down to what your tastes are, what you think is more correct in the way that the space is created and so forth on there, as to whether or not you're going to prefer the Dahlia over these two examples that I have here. All right, but with that, I think we can go ahead and wrap this up. I do like the Dahlia. I think it is a pretty good headphone. Again, it really excels for more synthetic type of music, and particularly music where a lot of impact is part of the experience, right? Because it really excels at that nice big soundstage, good resolution and detail retrieval, scales up well with source gear. It just, for me, it probably would not be a headphone that I would go out and buy if I were in the market for this headphone type at this price, just because I am a rock and metal listener first and foremost. And whether it be the balanced rings or the dynamic rings, it just gets to be a little bit too hot for me in the upper mids, lower treble, where it just gets a little bit too much glare and too fatiguing for me. Okay, faster with the dynamic rings, but it happens with both types. Now, what's interesting about Nick's design here is that it is conceivable that there could be another resonator ring type at some point, which kind of tilts the frequency response back into warm territory. Because if this were tuned a little bit more like either the D1 or the Mirph here, okay, but still had that impactful low end to it, which I actually really do like and is a lot of fun, then I would really, really be interested in the Dahlia. That's a combination that I could really get into. All right, but I'll go ahead and leave it there. Thanks for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe, comment, check out my PayPal, my Patreon. Consider becoming a channel member. Generally do those things you do to support YouTube channels, and as always, enjoy the music.